Cordelia Hartwell stepped down from the hired chaise in a borrowed gown of sapphire silk and felt the slipper she was wearing pinch her smallest toe, like a small, polite punishment.
"You will smile," her cousin Vivian had told her that morning, fingers fastening the hooks at her back with a fever flush already climbing her throat. "You will dance 2 dances, and you will eat 3 of the syllabubs, and you will not, under any circumstances, tell Lady Briar that you are a maid in the Duke of Ashbourne's household." "I am an upper housemaid," Cordelia had answered, with the precision she used to use on Greek translations in her father's study. "There is a hierarchy, even there. And tonight, you are my cousin Miss Cordelia Hartwell of Ledbury Vicarage, who is unfortunately not deceased, and who is, also unfortunately, the only Hartwell who will fit my gown. Smile, Corey. The charity wants 20 guineas, and the Marchioness wants 20 new faces, and I am abed with a fever that thinks it is a hammer." So Cordelia smiled and lied, and stepped down into a torchlit drive lined with linden trees just unfolding their first pale leaves, and felt the lie tighten across her ribs like a corset laced by an honest woman with bad intentions. The Marchioness's house rose 3 stories of warm Bath stone, every window flung wide to the spring evening. From inside came the gilded clamour of an orchestra tuning, the scent of beeswax candles, and a great green wave of hyacinths in glazed pots along the steps. Footmen in plum-coloured livery bowed her through. Cordelia kept her chin lifted, and her brass key, her father's vicarage key, on a black velvet ribbon under her bodice, pressed flat against her breastbone. It was the only thing she owned that did not belong to someone else. She was thinking how strange it was to be wearing 6 pounds of sapphire silk that was not hers, and 1 pair of slippers that were not hers, and a smile that was definitely not hers, when she walked straight into a stranger in the corridor outside the ballroom and stepped on his boot hard enough to leave a print.
"I beg your—" Cordelia began, and stopped.
He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders in a way his black evening coat could not pretend to soften, and he had caught her elbow to keep her from going down. His hand was warm even through the silk. His eyes, grey with a darker rim, like the edge of a thundercloud, went over her face with the close professional attention of a man who counted everything he saw. "Have we been introduced?" he said. "Or do you intend to keep stepping on me until I confess?" "That depends," Cordelia said, before she could remember she was supposed to be Vivian. "Are you a confession worth obtaining?" His mouth did something interesting at one corner. It was not a smile yet. It was the architecture of a smile, considered, then politely set aside. "I am told I am very expensive to bring to the point," he said. "May I escort you in the absence of the introduction you have just declined?" "I have not declined it. I am withholding it. I have not decided whether you deserve it." He laughed then. It was a short, surprised sound, as if laughter had caught him by the collar and shaken loose dust he did not know was there. He offered his arm. She took it because the alternative was standing in the corridor in a gown that did not fit, holding the wrist of a man whose face she had already known 3 breaths longer than she should have. She did not know him. That was the truth. She had never seen the Duke of Ashborne. She had been Cora Wright, upper housemaid in his Berkeley Square townhouse, for 14 months. She had aired his unused bedchamber and folded the cuffs of his unworn shirts, and never once had he stepped past the door. He had been in Cumbria after the funeral, then at his late father's hunting box in Northumberland. He had been everywhere except where she could see him. And now he was at her elbow, in a corridor in Berkshire smelling of beeswax and clean linen, and something, saddle leather perhaps, but had no business in a ballroom, and his hand was on her arm, and she was wearing sapphire silk that did not belong to her, and the lie had grown a second hook. "I will require your name eventually," he said. "You may have half," she said. "Half? You may have the half I am willing to be tonight."
He turned his face very slightly. The grey eyes were grave. "Then give me that half, madam, and I shall earn the other." The ballroom opened ahead of them like a struck chord. 200 candles in the great chandelier, a parquet floor polished to the colour of wet honey. The Marchioness's banner of yellow gorse spread across the back wall in tribute to the charity for the spring orphans of the Avon Mills. Cordelia stepped into it and felt the gown lift around her as if it were lighter than her own conscience. "Vivian Hartwell," she said, because that was the name on the Marchioness's list, and that was the half she could give him tonight, and even the half was a coin she would have to count later. "Of Ledbury." "Julian Ashborne," he said. She did not stop walking. She had been trained, very thoroughly, by 26 years of being a vicar's daughter, in the art of not stopping when the news that wished to fell you arrived. She nodded as if Julian Ashborne were any other set of syllables. She heard her own heart make a small, surprised sound, like a teacup put down too quickly on a saucer, and ignored it. "Your Grace," she said. "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight I am someone you have stepped on. That has merit. Find me," he said quietly, "when the second set begins. I will be the man pretending to listen to the Dowager Lady Staunton talk about her grandnephew the cleric. You may rescue me. It is the price of the boot. It will be a very high price, your sir. I am counting on it." He bowed over her hand. He did not kiss it. The brush of his glove against her knuckle was warmer than the kiss would have been. Her body marked the distinction with the precision of a scribe. He left her standing under the chandelier in a borrowed gown, with the lie now sitting on her shoulders like a third person. And she thought, very clearly, "I have stepped on the Duke of Ashbourne's boot. I have called myself my cousin. I am wearing my cousin's silk and his floor. I am, somewhere very near, in a corridor with no window, already in a great deal of trouble." Then she went to find the Dowager Lady Staunton, because there were rules, and the first rule was that you did not let a tall man in grey eyes wait long enough to start thinking about you on his own. The Dowager Lady Staunton was small and round, and had the curiosity of a kingfisher. She wore a turban the colour of overripe plums, and a great quantity of carnelian beads. She seized Cordelia's wrist before Cordelia had finished her curtsy and said, "Vivian, my dove, you look ill." "I am Vivian's cousin, Cordelia," Cordelia said. "And Vivian is ill, and she sends her—" "Oh," said the Dowager, brightening at once. "The Ledbury one, the clever one, the one who reads Greek. Sit down, child. I have a grandnephew who reads Greek. I shall match you. Where is— Ah, the Duke is coming. Wait, the Duke is coming. Cordelia, dear, sit very still." "I have just walked across half a ballroom, ma'am. I am quite still." "Be stiller. He is looking at you." "He is looking at the carnelian. He thinks it is a fire." The Dowager's mouth opened. Then she laughed, a delighted, dry sound. "Oh, my dear, he will be impossible. Sit very straight. Pretend you do not know how to read. Men of his sort enjoy converting women they think have been deprived of letters." "I shall pretend," Cordelia said, "that I do not know what a letter is." "Splendid. Here he comes." He came. He had shed his gloves. His hands were larger than gloves had suggested. He bowed to Lady Staunton with the patient formality of a man who had been doing this since he was 9, and then he turned to Cordelia and held out his hand for the dance she had not yet agreed to. "The second set has begun, Miss Hartwell." "Has it? It is very nearly over. Then I am the worst possible rescue." "You are," he said, "the only possible one." She rose. She put her hand in his. Behind her, the Dowager Lady Staunton said, very loudly to no one in particular, "I have not seen Julian Ashburn dance the second set in 3 years. I have not seen Julian Ashburn dance the second set since his father. Well, 3 years. I shall require a glass of negus and an explanation. He led Cordelia onto the floor. The orchestra took the first long breath of a country dance. He set his hand at her waist, as the figure required, and she felt the precise weight of it, and the precise restraint, and thought, he is being careful with me, as if I were made of something he respects. He does not know I am made of something he employs. You are not breathing, he said. I am pacing it. Why? Because if I breathe at the usual rate, I shall have to tell you something I have not yet decided to tell you. Tell me. Not yet. Then breathe at the unusual rate, he said, and I shall wait. They danced. He was very good, better than she had any right to expect of a man who had been doing it dutifully for 20 years. And he held her at exactly the distance that the figure permitted, and not a thumb's breadth closer. But the warmth of him reached across that thumb's breadth as if it were nothing. She thought, with a clarity she did not want, that she was going to remember the smell of his coat, beeswax, leather, a faint sharpness like new ink, for a long time. At the end of the dance he did not return her to the dowager. He drew her 2 paces aside and stood with her in a small bay window where the candlelight from the ballroom did not quite reach. I have a question, Miss Hartwell, he said.
You have several. You are choosing the one you can ask.
Yes, I have chosen. Why does a clever woman from Ledbury, who reads Greek, who is unimpressed by my title, who steps on my boot before she steps inside, arrive at a country charity ball alone, in a gown that does not quite fit her at the wrist? Cordelia looked down. The cuff of Vivian's sleeve was indeed a 1/4 inch loose. Vivian's wrist was finer. The cuff had been her own private joke for an hour. She had not anticipated that a stranger would catalogue her wrist with the attention of a tailor. She arrives, Cordelia said, because the cousin whose gown it is has a fever, and the Marchioness wanted 20 new faces, and she is the only Hartwell who fits in the country in the spring. And the wrist? The wrist, Cordelia said, is mine. He looked at her wrist a moment longer than was civil. Then he raised his eyes and held hers as if her wrist had been only an excuse to look at her in the first place. Find me, he said. Again. That is a great deal to ask of a borrowed wrist. I will accept it on its own terms. He bowed. He walked away. She watched the breadth of his shoulders as he made his way through the room to the Marchioness, and she pressed her thumb under the velvet ribbon at her throat and felt the brass key warm against her skin. And she thought, I will never, never in this life see him again. He will go back to his Cumberland. I will go back to my Berkeley Square. The Marchioness will write a note of thanks, and Vivian will recover, and the silk will be put away, and the gas line on the back stair will hum, and the lie will not have grown a 3rd hook. She believed it for very nearly 40 hours. The Duke of Ashborne rode out before dawn on the 2nd day of his unwelcome residence at Ashburn Park, because the alternative was the breakfast room, and the breakfast room contained the Dowager Lady Marisol Vane, and the Dowager Lady Marisol Vane contained a settlement. He rode west through the parkland his father had left him 6 months ago. The mare under him, Calypso, his father's old horse, 18 and stubborn, set the pace, because there was nowhere he was going. 6 months of ledgers in London, while his steward wrote him deferential letters. 6 months of avoiding the colonnade outside, which he could not enter without imagining his father fallen at the foot of his own gallery columns. He had come home this week because the Marchioness's charity ball had given him a public reason. He had not anticipated stepping on a sapphire silk slipper. He had not anticipated being stepped on. He turned Calypso back toward the house, thinking of the slight loose at her wrist. She would be a Hartwell of Ledbury. Vivian was the cousin who properly belonged to the gown. The clever one had inherited a brain instead of a dowry, and a way of looking at a duke as if he were a problem in translation. She had not been impressed. That was not, he discovered as he rode, the most uncomfortable thing about her. The most uncomfortable thing was that she had not been frightened. He had been told all his life he could frighten women without intending to. Vivian Hartwell's clever cousin had walked through the weather as if it were her own. He came up the drive at a hand gallop he did not need. Pratt was waiting at the carriage block with the look of a man who had been steeling himself. Lady Vane, Pratt told him, was waiting in the breakfast room and had called for the steward and asked to see the household ledgers. Julian's hand stilled on the rein. He asked where Hargrave was. In the steward's room, Pratt said, with the ledgers and Lady Vane. As of 3 minutes ago. Julian swung down, handed the rein to Pratt, and walked into his own house at the pace he had used in His Majesty's service. He did not run. Dukes did not run in the morning before chocolate. He found Lady Marisol Vane, 27, raven-haired, in a riding habit the colour of bruised plums, standing at his steward's desk with 3 of the household ledgers open. Hargrave, the steward, was the colour of a man who had been asked a question he did not want to answer in front of a witness who would remember it. Lady Vane did not look up. There was a Cora Wright on the London staff, upper housemaid, who had not drawn her last quarter's wages from Berkeley Square. Hargrave thought they might have been paid out in Berkshire. She raised her grey eyes, paler than his own, and asked whether he had given a quarter's wages in the country to a maid he had never met. He told Hargrave to leave them. Hargrave left them, taking only 1 of the 3 ledgers he had been holding. Julian saw without comment that Lady Marisol had a thumb still on the page he had been studying when he came in. He observed that she was reading his ledgers. His father's ledgers, she corrected. They had been his, he said, and were now Julian's. She smiled, the smile he had been seeing since he was 9. When he asked why she wanted the chambermaids list, she answered that the park had been kept badly. The London staff paid through, the country staff paid through unevenly. There was a chambermaid in London who had had 3 quarters from the country accounts. Why? He took the ledger from her and shut it. His late father, he said, had had a habit of putting Maid'S on the country book when the London book ran close. Hargrave had been managing it without asking him. Interesting, she said. Unremarkable, he said. Cora Wright, she said very pleasantly. It is the name of a vicar's daughter from Herefordshire. Did you know? Julian did not move. The room, green-papered, smelling of beeswax, with the lily fragrance of a bowl of forced narcissi on the mantel, held very still. Did I know what? That you have, under your roof, a maid called Cora Wright, whose father was the Reverend Edmund Hartwell of Ledbury, and who has, under another name, a cousin who attended my dear Lady Briar's charity ball Tuesday night in a sapphire silk gown. The slight loose at the wrist, the clever woman who had said her name was Vivian. Julian felt the rune close 1 degree. Marisol. You danced with her, Julian. You stood with her in the bay window for 11 minutes. The Dowager Lady Staunton's footman counted. The Dowager paid him a shilling to count. I gave the Dowager another shilling, and she gave me the count. You are not entertaining. I am useful. You are interfering in my household. I am interfering in your settlement, Julian. There is a difference. She crossed the room and stopped at the door. The settlement your father signed in May, the year of his death, requires you to marry by your 29th birthday, or forfeit the Cumberland portion. You are 28 in August. Your father's wish was that you marry me. You did not dance the second set in 3 years. You danced the second set with a girl in a borrowed gown. How do you know it was borrowed? Because Hargrave's wife knows the Ledbury cousins. The clever one has been in domestic service in London. She has been in your London house. She walked across your floor in your cousin's silk and let you ask her name. Get out, Marisol. I shall be at Briar Court till Sunday. Come and find me there. Or do not. The settlement does not care. She went. Julian stood at the steward's desk with his hand on the closed ledger. The brass key. the way she had pressed her thumb under the velvet ribbon at her throat at the end of the dance. He had taken it for nervous habit. He had not taken it for a vicarage key, kept under a borrowed bodice by a woman who had walked across his own house in livery on Wednesday and a sapphire gown on Tuesday. The clever one, of Ledbury. He sat down and pulled the household ledger to him, and opened it to the column marked Wages, Country, and ran his finger down the page until he found her. C. Wright, upper housemaid, 6 guineas. Q. Transfer from Leaden Staff, in post, 14 Mathau. 14 months and 3 weeks. He counted, in his head, the months he had been at Berkeley Square in that time, when she would have been there, and how many doors they would have stood on either side of, and how very precisely she had said his Christian name in the corridor outside the ballroom on Tuesday. Julian Ashborne. Not tonight. Tonight I am someone you have stepped on. She had known. He set down the pen. He did not, he marked this carefully because it would matter, he did not, in that moment, decide what he felt. He decided what he would do. He would ride to Ledbury Vicarage. He would find the cousin in her own clothes. He would offer her the half she had promised him on Tuesday night. He would do this before Marisol Vane could. He stood, and he called for Pratt, and he sent for fresh horses. Cordelia, that morning, was on her knees in the principal guest bedchamber of Ashbourne Park, polishing a brass fire fender she had polished 47 times before, and she did not yet know that the Duke was riding east in the direction in which she did not, today, happen to be. "Cora?" She looked up. Mrs. Fenwick, the housekeeper, stood in the doorway. Mrs. Fenwick was 63 and had a face that had been clever in 1788 and clever in every year since, and a black bombazine gown without ornament except a small silver crucifix she had got from her own younger sister, lost to a fever in 1814. Cordelia answered to her name. Mrs. Fenwick told her she was wanted in the still room. The dairymaid had scalded her wrist. Sally was hysterical, and she required a woman who could read the label on the witch hazel. Cordelia said at once. Mrs. Fenwick added that His Grace was coming in this afternoon. He had sent a boy at 6. The breakfast room was to be aired and the library opened. Cordelia would not be required to wait at table. "Look up," Mrs. Fenwick said, and Cordelia looked up, and Mrs. Fenwick's clever face was perfectly still. "Cora, my girl, there are a number of rooms in this house you will not enter today, will you?" Cordelia said no, Mrs. Fenwick. "Good. Witch hazel." She went down to the still room, calmed Sally, bound the dairymaid's wrist in clean linen, sent Tom for the apothecary, and stood for a moment with her hand on the windowsill. She had not been thinking about him for almost 4 minutes. That was progress. Tom came to the doorway with the message Mrs. Fenwick had sent. A gentleman had come in at the front. Cora was to take the back stair to the linen press and stay until she sent. Tom did not, at first, run. He reported, as if it were the chief piece of intelligence, that the gentleman was very tall. Then he ran. He ran. She did not. She stood with her hand on the windowsill for another half-minute, with the kind of calm a vicar's daughter has practiced in childhood for use in emergencies. She did not go to the linen press. She went up the back stair into her own whitewashed room under the eave, took off the cap, looked at herself in the small wall glass, and saw a young woman with chestnut hair pinned tight, an ink-stained thumb, a brass key on a black ribbon at her throat, a livery apron over a grey work gown. And she said, aloud and to no one, "Cordelia Hartwell, you idiot." Then she pinned her cap back on and went down the front stair. She met him in the hall. He was standing on the rose and cream marble in his riding boots, hat in hand, with Pratt behind him at 3 paces and Mrs. Fenwick to his right. He had been in mid-sentence with Mrs. Fenwick. The mid-sentence stopped. She watched it stop in his face, the eyebrow about to rise, the civil question about to be asked. She saw him take her in, the cap, the apron,
the brass key at her throat where the sapphire silk had been on Tuesday, the ink-stained thumb she had not this morning washed off. Mrs. Fenwick said, in the most level voice Cordelia had ever heard from a housekeeper in her life, that this was Cora Wright, their upper housemaid. He thanked her with the same level voice and asked her very civilly to leave them. Mrs. Fenwick began to object on behalf of the girl. He said please. The please was enough. Mrs. Fenwick looked at Cordelia for one fraction of a second. The fraction said, with the same brevity as the small silver cross, "I am within calling." Then Mrs.
Fenwick withdrew, and Pratt withdrew, and Cordelia and the Duke of Ashborne stood at opposite ends of the hall in his own house, with the spring sun coming through the fanlight over the door, and 12 paces of polished marble between them. He named the 3 names she had been carrying, Cora Wright, Cordelia Hartwell, Vivian Hartwell, and put each in the air between them like a card laid on a table. Only the third, she said, was a lie. The other 2 were halves. He set the hat down on a side table that had a marquetry inlay and a small Sèvres bowl on it she had dusted on Monday. He looked at the bowl as though he had never seen it. He looked at her as though he had been seeing her, in some other version of himself, for 11 minutes on Tuesday night. "Half housemaid, half vicar's daughter," he said, and she answered that he had it with reasonable accuracy. He asked her why. She began with her father. He interrupted her and told her to sit down. She told him she could not, that she was wearing the apron of a maid and could not sit on his hall chair in this house in this apron. He directed her instead to the morning room, where the people who wore aprons in this house also sat when they were asked to. She said, "Your Grace." He said, "Cordelia." She had not, until that moment, understood the difference between her name said by a man she had stepped on in a corridor and her name said by the same man in his own house. The first had been a curiosity, the second was a summons. She crossed the marble. She went into the morning room. He shut the door. The morning room faced south, wallpaper a green and cream stripe his late mother had chosen in 1809. A fire was lit even in May. Cordelia stood beside the writing desk because that was where the senior chambermaid was permitted to stand when speaking to the master. He stood at the fire. The gray eyes were on her. He did not at first speak. She observed, quietly, that he had come to find her. He had, he said, yes. He had known which name was on the wages book. He had not known which name was sleeping in his house until he rode in at the door. "Sleeping in his attic, sir," she corrected. He told her she was splitting a hair. It was the only hair she had, she said. Her cousin had the gown. His mouth did the architecture of a smile again. He stopped it and told her to tell him. She told him. She told him calmly, with her hand on the writing desk and the brass key warm under her bodice, because a vicar's daughter has been trained from infancy to deliver bad news plainly. Her father, the Reverend Edmund Hartwell of Ledbury, had inherited in 1820 a portfolio of canal shares and an enthusiasm for canals, and had multiplied the second and lost the first in 18 months. He had been taken at Christmas of 1822 of a fever, leaving 4 daughters with a small mortgaged cottage and a debt of £1,400 to a Birmingham banker. Her cousin Vivian had taken the 3 younger Hartwell girls into her house in Cheltenham. Cordelia had not. Cordelia had taken a place, under her mother's maiden name, Wright, because she did not wish her sisters to know the eldest had gone into service. She had paid down £118 of the Birmingham debt out of 14 months of wages and a quarter's tips. She had 8 years left at the present rate. She had... He told her he would pay it. She stopped speaking. The Birmingham debt, he said. He would pay it. This afternoon. Send Pratt with the letter. She told him he would not, Your Grace. He answered that it was not a gentleman's behaviour to discover his own housemaid was repaying £1,000 debt, and to leave her to it.
She answered that it was not a gentleman's behaviour to ride into his own house and offer £1,000 to a woman before he had eaten his luncheon. He stopped. Then, with a precise economy she would remember, he laughed. "Cordelia Hartwell," he said. "Will you sit down?" She told him she was dusty. He observed that he was dusty. "Sit down," he said. "Please." She sat down. On the edge of the chair, with her knees together, in the apron of a maid, in the morning room of her employer, with a brass key warm under her ribbon, while the Duke of Ashborne moved the fire iron 1 inch to the left because he did not, just then, know what else to do with his hands.
You called me Julian on Tuesday.
No, sir, I did not. You said, "Your Grace," in a voice that said, "Julian." I noticed. I had not, Your Grace. I had not had time, sir, to be careful. Good. He paused. Cordelia. Sir? On Tuesday, I asked you for half of a name. You gave me a different half from the half you might have given me. Yes, sir. I find that I do not require the other half. She looked up. I find, he said, that I will take the half I have, the half who steps on Duke's boots and reads Greek and pretends not to know me, the half who is at present, under my own roof, repaying her father's canal debt to a Birmingham banker on a housemaid's quarter. I find that I will take that half, Cordelia. And I find that I will give her, if she will permit it, the half of mine that has not, in the 6 months since my father was taken, been able to bring itself to enter the colonnade where he fell. She did not, she would think of this often in the years to come, she did not, at first, understand what he was saying. Sir, I am asking you, Cordelia Hartwell, to marry me. The brass key, against her sternum, was suddenly very cold. The morning room was very quiet. Outside the window, a chaffinch was repeating, very precisely, 3 syllables, the second above the first, the third below. You do not know me, Your Grace. I know enough. She enumerated for him what he knew. She had stepped on his boot. She had been in his house in her cousin's gown and in his housemaid's cap. She had lied to him about her own name. He answered, simply, yes. She told him he did not call that knowing her. He called it, he said, knowing the woman he should like to be married to. 6 was not enough, she told him. It was, he said, more than his father had had about his mother. She tried again. She was, she pointed out, sitting in his morning room in an apron. She had a sister in Cheltenham who taught the piano because they could not afford a master. He was aware. I am 26 years old. I cannot dance the second set. I've never been to Almack's. I read Greek because my father taught me before I was 8, and because I will not unteach myself for any man who will require me to. I do not, sir. I will not, sir. I will not promise anything until I have had a week. A week, sir. A week. To answer. Cordelia, I am not in this room this morning in a state to refuse you a week. She looked at his hands on the fire iron, the breadth of a man schooled to be careful with breakable things. She looked at the grey eyes. They were not, in this morning room, the thundercloud they had been in the corridor. They were the colour of pewter, set down by the fire for so long the kitchen had warmed it. A week, Your Grace. He gave her his Christian name as a correction, very quietly, and she repeated it after him. He let the name happen between them, and did not push it. He told her then that she would not, this week, repolish that fire fender. She would eat at Mrs. Fenwick's table, if she did not yet wish to eat at his. She would read in his library at any hour. She would polish no brass. It was, he said, the only thing he was permitted to demand. I will read in your library, she said. I will polish nothing. I will eat in Mrs. Fenwick's room. I will sleep, Julian, under your slates, in the bed I have made for 14 months.
until I have decided what to do with the half of my name that is still mine." He answered her with a single yes. She answered the yes with one of her own. He nodded. He bowed. The bow was the bow of a man who would have liked to do something else with his hands, and had not been raised to permit himself. He left the morning room, the door shut. Cordelia sat on the edge of the green and cream chair for 30 seconds with her hand on the writing desk. Then she rose, stood at the window, walked across to the fire, and set her palm flat against the marble of the mantelpiece, and said aloud, to a chaffinch that was not listening, in the same voice her father had used to deliver the Easter homily, "Cordelia Hartwell, you have just been proposed to by a man who does not know you, by the wages book, by the steward, by Mrs. Fenwick, by the cap on your head, by the £1,000 you owe a banker in Birmingham. He does not know you." Then she went down the back stairs to the still room to make Bessie a fresh cold water cloth for the dairymaid, because the dairymaid's wrist was not going to bind itself, and because Cordelia Hartwell had not, by 26, learned what to do with her hands when they were not working. The library at Ashbourne Park was a 2-story room with a gallery and a great bay window over the lilac walk. The lilacs were 3 weeks shy of opening, the buds the colour of bruised plums. Cordelia sat in the bay with a copy of Sophocles she had not seen since 1822, her ink-stained thumb on the page where her father's penciled marginalia stopped, the chorus of Antigone on the unwritten laws. Her pulse settled into the rhythm of the chaffinch in the lilac. Julian found her there at 3:30. He had been with the steward. He observed, dryly, that she had not eaten. She told him she had taken bread and cheese with Mrs. Fenwick at 1. He corrected the "Your Grace" to Julian, and she let him have the correction. He observed she had a smudge of ink on the side of her nose. Yesterday's, she told him. Mrs. Fenwick had promised it would come off in cold water, and it had not. "Mrs. Fenwick is wrong. That is not, in this house, a statement to be made aloud." He laughed. He sat down opposite her in the bay window, on the green-cushioned bench, very near, knees not quite touching. He set on the bench between them a small object. He told her to look. She looked. It was a brass divider, a surveyor's, with a worn ebony handle and a small initial A burnt into the wood. His father's. The old Duke had used it to measure walks, plan drains, work out where his oaks would shade by August. He had carried it in his coat pocket on the day. It was the only thing of his Julian had been able to hold. She put out her hand. He set the divider in her palm. It was warm from his coat. She said she was sorry, Julian. He thanked her. She told him she would hold it for as long as he wanted, and he answered that that was the offer he had come to ask for. She closed her fingers around the divider. He looked at her hand. He did not take it back. After a pause, she laid the divider down on the bench between them and folded her hand back into her lap. She asked how long he had had it in his pocket today. Since the steward had asked him where the South Meadow drains were, he said. 6 months. She told him to send for her, when he knew, to walk beside him when he went out to look at them. "Beside me," he said. "All right." They sat for a while. The clock on the mantel struck the quarter. He observed, without looking at her, that she had been reading Sophocles. She admitted to the Antigone. Out of perversity, he suggested, and she corrected him. Out of her father's marginalia. He said she was going to be, Cordelia, very hard work. "Yes." "I find I am glad of it." They sat. He did not, at the end of the half hour, lift the brass divider off the bench between them. He left it where she had laid it down. He rose. He bowed. He went to find Mrs. Fenwick, because the housekeeper had been pacing the corridor outside the library for 40 minutes and would, if not addressed, give herself an attack of the spleen. Cordelia stayed in the bay window. She took up Sophocles. She read past her father's last marginal mark. She felt the precise weight of the brass divider on the bench 3 inches from her hip, and she did not, that afternoon, polish anything. On Thursday the weather changed. A warm rain came up from the south overnight, and by morning the lilac walk was running with water, and the gravel was the colour of wet biscuit. Julian rode in at 9, wet to the collar from going round the home farm, and he found Cordelia in the still room, because he had asked Mrs. Fenwick at the door, and Mrs. Fenwick had said, with the dryness of 40 years of housekeeping, "Your Grace, she is in the still room boiling lavender. I am told that this is, in the modern way of medicine, called useful. I have been told further that I am not, this week, to prevent her from being useful. I am, Your Grace, adjusting." He thanked her. Mrs. Fenwick added that Lady Vane had been at the gate twice this morning. She had not been admitted. He told her to send Pratt out to the lodge and to tell him he would ride down to Briar Court this afternoon and have his conversation with Lady Vane there, not here. And, Mrs. Fenwick, she was to tell Miss Hartwell that he would be in at 4. Mrs. Fenwick repeated the name back to him, very levelly, and accepted it. He went up to change his coat. Mrs. Fenwick went down to the still room and stood in the doorway. "Cora, Miss, child, His Grace will be in at 4. He has told me to call you Miss Hartwell. He has gone to Briar Court this afternoon to have his conversation with Lady Vane there, and not here." Cordelia asked her, twice, if she was angry. With her. Mrs. Fenwick looked at her for a long moment. "Cora, my girl, I am not angry. I am uneasy. You are clever. You are kind. You are not, and I say this with affection, you are not the woman this house has been waiting for. I have been waiting for 2 months for Lady Marisol Vane. The settlement has been—" Cordelia interrupted. She knew about the settlement. He had told her this morning. The Cumberland portion, the 29th birthday, the clause. Mrs. Fenwick said quietly that she was not, child, going to be Lady Marisol Vane. Cordelia agreed she was not. "And he is, Cora, he is not built that way. He looks like his father. He is not his father. His father folded. Julian Ashborne, when his hand has been set down on a thing, does not lift it again unless the thing he is holding lifts itself. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Then I shall stop being uneasy. Boil your lavender, child. I shall send up the still maid to take the strain off your hands. You will not, this week, do it yourself." Cordelia thanked her. "There was nothing, child, to thank her for," Mrs. Fenwick answered. "She was adjusting. She would be a great while adjusting. Be patient with her." She went. Cordelia stood with the spoon in her hand and the lavender turning the room blue and silver in the rainlight. And she thought, Mrs. Fenwick is the second person, after Vivian, who has told me what I am for. The first told me I was for a fever and a gown. The second is telling me I am for a man who, when his hand has been set down on a thing, does not lift it again. I do not yet know whether I am the sort of thing that can be lifted. I have not been tested. She set down the spoon. The test was, at that moment, already on its way through the gate, in the bruised, plum-coloured riding habit of Lady Marisol Vane. Lady Marisol did not come in at the gate that morning. Pratt, instructed, went down to the lodge with a civil note from Mrs. Fenwick. The note said, "His Grace regrets that he is from home this morning. He will wait upon Lady Vane at Briar Court at 3 o'clock this afternoon. He hopes that Lady Vane will excuse him." Lady Marisol read the note, folded it neatly into thirds, and said to the lodgekeeper, Mr. Pringle, "Pringle, my lady, be good enough to give me your boy." "My lady?" "Your boy, the red-haired one, the one who reads. I shall need him for an hour." "My lady, beg pardon, my boy is required at the—" "Pringle, I shall not need him long."
Mr. Pringle, who had been at the gate of Ashbourne Park for 31 years and had learned to give beautiful women in carriages anything that did not require a key, called his boy Robin out of the lodge kitchen. Robin came. He was 11, with hair the colour of a fox cub and a guilty look already. "Robin, you will deliver this letter to the back door of the great house. You will deliver it into the hand of the upper housemaid, Miss Cora Wright. You will not, under any circumstances, deliver it to Mrs. Fenwick. You will not, Robin, deliver it to His Grace. You will deliver it to the housemaid, you understand?"
"My lady."
"Here is a shilling."
"My lady."
"Run." He ran. Lady Marisol drove on. The letter reached Cordelia in the still room at 11:20, by the hand of Robin Pringle, out of breath and ashamed of his ears. Mrs. Fenwick did not see it. The letter passed under the still room door under a tea towel. Cordelia took it. She opened it at the still room window with her thumb under the seal. The handwriting was very fine. The hand had been schooled in Paris. "Miss Hartwell, I have been informed that you and I have an interest in common. I should be obliged if you would call on me at Briar Court this evening at 7 o'clock. I shall send my carriage to the lodge gate of Ashbourne Park at 6:30. Come alone. I do not, I assure you, intend to be cruel. I intend to be useful. Marisol Vane." Cordelia stood with the letter in her hand and looked out at the lilac walk in the rain. The first impulse was to take the letter to Julian. The second impulse was to take it to Mrs. Fenwick. The third, the one she did not want to recognize, was to go. To stand in Lady Marisol's morning room at Briar Court at 7, in her own grey work gown, with her father's brass key under her bodice, and hear what Lady Marisol Vane had to tell her. Because Cordelia Hartwell did not, at 26, in the morning room of a duke who had proposed on 3 days' acquaintance, yet know who she was for. Lady Marisol would tell her. Lady Marisol had, undoubtedly, 6 pieces of information about Cordelia Hartwell that Cordelia did not have about herself. She folded the letter. She put it in the pocket of her apron. She stirred the lavender. She did not, at 11:20, in the still room, yet decide. At 4, she sat in the library bay window with Sophocles on her knee and her father's brass divider on the bench at her hip. She had asked Julian on Wednesday if she might keep it for an hour, and he had said, "As long as you like." Julian came in, wet to the collar from Briar Court, smelling of horse and warm wool, with a fresh scratch at his cheekbone from a hedge. He told her he had been to Briar Court. Mrs. Fenwick had told her, she said. He had asked Lady Marisol, civilly and at length, and twice, to leave her alone. She asked what Marisol had said. She had smiled, he said. She had said she had not yet begun. She had offered him a cup of China tea he did not want, and said, Cordelia, that she would, by Sunday, have made her wish she had never set foot in this house. That was a strong claim, Julian, she observed. Marisol made them, he said. She was not afraid of her. He told her she should be a little afraid of her. Julian, I have been a vicar's daughter in a vicarage with no fire in the kitchen on Christmas Eve of 1822. I have been a housemaid in your London house on a quarter when the under-butler suspected the housemaid of stealing the lemon spoons. I am, Julian. I am a great while past being afraid of a beautiful woman in a riding habit who has a settlement in her pocket. He looked at her a long moment. Then he sat down on the bench beside her, very near, his thigh against the brass divider where she had left it. He did not touch her. Tell me, Cordelia, what you are afraid of. Tell me first, she said, what you are afraid of. That you will go back to Cheltenham. That is fair. What are you afraid of, Cordelia? That I will, at the end of this week, hold a piece of news about myself that you do not know, and that I shall be required to say it aloud to you, and that the saying of it will, in your face,
Make me a smaller woman than I have so far been able to be.
Cordelia,
Yes,
you will not, in this house, ever be required to make yourself smaller. I have not asked you for it. I shall never ask you for it. She looked at her own hand on the page of the Antigone. The ink stain on her thumb was fading. By Sunday it would be gone. She did not, at 4 o'clock on Thursday in the bay window, tell him about Lady Marisol's letter. She would think about that decision later, for a long time. She went. She told no one. She put on her grey work gown, bonnet, and a borrowed black wool cloak, and walked down the lilac walk in the wet evening at 6:30. Lady Marisol's open carriage was waiting at the lodge gate, hood up against the rain. The coachman did not look at her face. He drove her 4 miles east into the gravel sweep of Briar Court. A footman in moss-green livery handed her down, a butler took her cloak, and she was shown, without her name being announced, into a small morning room hung in apricot silk. Lady Marisol Vane stood at the fire. She wore a gown of dark green merino, very plain, very fine. Her raven hair was bound in a simple knot. The grey eyes, the colour of an unpolished spoon, were level. Miss Hartwell, thank you for coming.
my lady.
Sit.
I prefer to stand, my lady.
As you wish. Tea?
No, my lady.
Then we shall be quick. I have 3 things to say to you, Miss Hartwell, and you will hear them, and then you will go home in my carriage, and I shall not trouble you again. Is that an acceptable arrangement?
It is acceptable, my lady.
Good. Stand by the fire. You are wet to the ankle. Cordelia did not move. Lady Marisol's mouth, very faintly, lifted at one corner. Suit yourself. First, the settlement my father and Julian's father signed in May 1825 requires Julian to marry by his 29th birthday, August this year, or forfeit the Cumberland portion. The Cumberland portion is the home of 240 tenants. It is the only solvent estate Julian holds. Without it, the Berkshire estate collapses within 4 years. Julian knows this. He has not told you.
He has told me about the settlement, my lady.
Has he told you that his father wished him to marry me? Has he told you that I have been raised in this house since I was 7? Has he told you that my dowry is £40,000, and the Cumberland tenants are entailed on the issue of myself and the heir of Ashborne?
He has told me about the settlement, my lady.
Second, Lady Marisol did not raise her voice. His father did not perish in an accident. He took his own decision, that morning, to step in front of his own carriage, because 3 of his investments in the Caledonian Canal had been called the week before. The coroner returned misadventure as a kindness. Julian knows. He has been 6 months unable to enter the colonnade. He thinks I do not know. I do. I have been at the house since I was 7. I am Miss Hartwell, the only person now alive who knew his father that morning. Cordelia's hand closed on the brass key under her bodice. She did not, she would remember this, she did not, at this point, break. Third, my lady. Third. Julian will, if you marry him, forfeit the Cumberland portion in August unless I sign a renunciation of the settlement clause. I am prepared to sign it. On terms. You will write me, this week, a letter declining the Duke's offer in your own hand. You will leave Ashbourne Park before Sunday. You will give as your reason that you have been less than candid with him about your station. In exchange, I will sign the renunciation by Monday's post. The Cumberland tenants will keep their fields. Julian will keep his estate. I will not, Miss Hartwell, marry him myself. I am 32. I require what my father raised me to require, the absence of his ruin. You are not 32, my lady. You are 27. I am 32. I am 5 years older than Julian thinks. By next Wednesday, of an age at which I should be settled.
I shall not be settling on Julian. I shall be settling on the Earl of Carmichael, who is 51 and has a daughter your age. I need the Cumberland renunciation paid for in advance. The price, Miss Hartwell, is your letter." There was, for a long moment, no sound in the apricot morning room, except the rain on the south window and a small log shifting in the grate. Cordelia held the brass key under her bodice and thought, with the clarity of a vicar's daughter at the hour at which her father had used to read evening prayers, "This woman is telling me the truth. She is telling me 3 pieces of it. The first I half knew. The second I did not know. The third, what if I refuse the letter, my lady? Then I shall not sign the renunciation. Julian forfeits the Cumberland portion in August. The Berkshire estate folds in 4 years. 240 tenants are turned off their fields. You may live with this. I shall not." Lady Marisol's grey eyes were grave. "Miss Hartwell, I am not your enemy. I was, at 19, the girl in the borrowed silk. My father bought it on his account in Paris. I learnt, at 22, that the silk had cost a Cumberland tenant his cottage. I have been, for 10 years, buying the cottage back. The renunciation is the last cottage. I am asking you for it. You are asking me, my lady, for a letter that will tell Julian I am not, that I have not been, that you have been less than candid about your station. It is, Miss Hartwell, the truth. It is, my lady, a true sentence used as a weapon. Yes. I will not write the letter tonight, my lady. I did not ask you to write it tonight. I asked you to write it this week, by Sunday's post. I will not promise it to you tonight, my lady. Then go home, Miss Hartwell. Think for a day. I shall send a footman on Saturday at noon. Hand in the letter or send him empty. I shall judge by the empty hand." She rang the bell. The butler came. Cordelia's cloak, wet, heavy, smelling faintly of horse, was returned to her shoulders. She did not curtsy. Lady Marisol did not bow. The footman handed Cordelia into the carriage. The coachman did not look at her face. The horses turned. She did not, for the 4 miles back, let herself weep. She held the brass key under her bodice and said to herself the chorus on the unwritten laws, in Greek, all the way back to the lodge gate. At the lodge gate she got down. Mr. Pringle opened the side wicket and let her up the drive on her own feet. She walked up the lilac walk and let herself in by the still room door. Mrs. Fenwick was waiting with a covered cup of soup. "Cora, sit." "Mrs. Fenwick?" "Sit, child." She sat. Mrs. Fenwick set the soup in front of her. Mrs. Fenwick did not, for which Cordelia would, the rest of her life, be grateful, ask where she had been. "Eat." "Mrs. Fenwick, I have made a difficulty." "Eat your soup first. The difficulty will keep." She ate. In her attic room she did not sleep, and she heard, at 3, the long, quiet creak of the back stair as someone went down it. Julian, she thought, going to the colonnade in the dark, to stand at the foot of the column where his father had fallen, because something was wrong in his house and he did not know what. He would not, this night, come up to the attic and ask. He had given her a week. He would hold the week. She did not, that night, go down the back stair to the colonnade. She would, later, think this was the first place she had begun to be wrong. Friday morning, the rain stopped. The lilac walk steamed in the new sun. Cordelia rose at 5. She washed her face in cold water. She put on her grey work gown and cap and apron. She had not, this week, polished a fender, but she could not yet stop wearing the apron of a maid while she had not made a decision. And she went down to the still room, made up 4 jars of the lavender water she had started on Wednesday, and carried them in a basket to the housekeeper's room, set them on the deal table. She asked Mrs. Fenwick if she would sit with her a moment. Mrs. Fenwick said she would. Cordelia did not, at first, speak. She found her hands required a small task. She took up Mrs. Fenwick's housekeeping book, the great red ledger with the year on the spine in gilt, and ran her finger down the column for dairy, and remarked that the dairymaid was improving. The wrist would mend by Monday. Mrs. Fenwick knew. Cordelia had a question to ask her. "Ask it," Mrs. Fenwick said. "What did his father do?" Mrs. Fenwick set down her cup. She did not look surprised. She asked who had told her. Cordelia named Lady Marisol Vane. "Ah," Mrs. Fenwick said. "Was it true?" Mrs. Fenwick looked into her cup of tea for a long moment. "It is true, Cora. He went out of the breakfast room at 8:30 and walked out under the colonnade in his blue coat. The carriage was coming round from the stables. He stepped, Cora, child, under the off-horse, on his own drive, in front of his coachman, who is no longer in this country because we paid his passage. The coroner returned misadventure. Julian was in Cumberland. He arrived 3 days later. Julian has known, since the second morning after the funeral, what his father did. He has not been able to enter the colonnade." "He knew," Cordelia said. "He knew," Mrs. Fenwick confirmed. Lady Marisol had told her, last night, that he did not know. "Lady Marisol was mistaken," Mrs. Fenwick said. Or, Cora, she was not mistaken, and she was using a piece of a truth in a way she should not be. "She told me," Cordelia said very carefully, "that the price of her signature on the Cumberland renunciation is a letter from me by Sunday's post declining Julian's offer. She told me that if I do not write the letter, the Cumberland portion will be forfeit in August, and 240 tenants will lose their fields." Mrs. Fenwick said, "Ah," very softly. Cordelia asked whether that part was true. "The settlement clause was real," Mrs. Fenwick answered. "The Cumberland portion was real. The renunciation was real. The tenants were real. Lady Marisol's offer was hers to make and hers to withdraw. She was, Cora also, by Wednesday next, marrying a man twice her age for the absence of her father's ruin. That part was also true." Mrs. Fenwick had had it from her own maid at Briar Court 3 months ago. She'd been hoping it would be Julian who told her, not her.
"What do I do, Mrs. Fenwick?" Mrs. Fenwick set down her cup.
"Cora, my girl, you do this morning what you have done every morning of your 14 months in this house. You go up the back stair. You knock at the library door. You go in. You sit in the bay window with the brass divider and Antigone. You wait. He will come at 4. You will tell him every word Lady Marisol said last night. You will not write that letter on Sunday's post." He will be angry." "Yes." "With me?" "Yes. For an hour. He has, Cora, he has been raised to be angry for an hour and then to be reasonable for the rest of his life. His father was the other way round. Julian is the better animal. Trust him for the hour." "Mrs. Fenwick." "Yes." "Thank you." "Eat your bread, child. There is honey." Cordelia ate her bread. She went up the back stair. She knocked at the library door. She did not yet know that Lady Marisol, on the long drive home the previous evening, had sent her footman ahead with a small folded note for the Dowager Lady Staunton, who would carry it to the Marchioness of Briar, who would carry it to her cousin, the editor of the Berkshire Gazette, who, with a careful eye for libel, would not print it, but would, by noon on Saturday, send a private morning call to the Duke of Ashborne with a copy attached. The note said, "The housemaid known in Berkeley Square as Cora Wright is in residence at Ashbourne Park. She is also known as Miss Cordelia Hartwell of Ledbury, who attended the Marchioness's charity ball on Tuesday in her cousin's gown under her cousin's name. The Duke is, I am informed,
on the point of forgetting himself in a manner that will, by Sunday, be the business of every drawing-room in Berkshire. A friend of the house. The note went, as Lady Marisol had intended, by the long route, through 3 drawing-rooms, through the Gazette editor's careful hand, to the Duke's own breakfast room on Saturday at 10:30. By the time he had it in his fingers, it had been read by 16 pairs of eyes. It would be, by Sunday evening, the only subject of conversation between Marlowe and Wantage. Lady Marisol had not written a libel. She had only written a fact, and let it travel. Cordelia, sitting in the library bay window on Friday afternoon at 4, with the brass divider on the bench beside her, did not yet know about the note. She had, at 3:30, finally, with a hand that had to be steadied twice on the writing desk, written a letter. The letter was 3 sentences long. It was addressed to Lady Marisol Vane of Briar Court. It read, "Madam, I will not write the letter you have asked me for. I will not leave Ashbourne Park before Sunday morning. I shall, this evening at 5, tell the Duke of Ashborne every word you said to me last night. Cordelia Hartwell." She sealed it with the wax in the drawer, not Julian's seal, but the small bone seal her father had carried on the brass key ribbon at her throat. A single rosemary sprig, the motto in her grandfather's Latin. Sic recollo. Thus I remember. She rang for Tom. She gave him the letter and a shilling out of her own quarter's wages. She told Tom to carry it to the lodge gate, to give it into the hand of Mr. Pringle, and to tell him it was for Briar Court, that she had sent it, and that he was not, Tom, to tell anyone in the house he had taken it. Tom asked her if she was in trouble. No, Tom, she told him. She was, at last, in the right place. That was, Miss Cora. Nice for her. Yes. Run. He ran. Cordelia sat back down in the bay window. She picked up the brass divider. She held it in her palm a moment. It was now, she thought, no longer a question of what she was for. It was a question, she thought, of what she was going to be. Julian came in at 4. He had a piece of paper in his hand. It was not folded. It was creased many times. He had been holding it in his fist. He set the paper down on the bench between them and told her to read it. She read it. It was the Gazette editor's morning call. The note from a friend of the house was pinned to it in a fair copy. She read it twice. She set it down on the brass divider. Julian, tell me, he said. Everything. She told him. Every word Lady Marisol had said on Thursday evening, including the part about his father. The offer of the letter for Sunday's post, and the note she had sent that afternoon by Tom the boot boy. The brass key under her bodice, and her grandfather's rosemary seal, and the canal shares, and the Birmingham banker. And, last, that she had gone up the back stair with the intention of telling him every word at 4, and had been beaten to 4 o'clock by Marisol's note by half an hour. Julian listened. He did not, at any point, interrupt. When she had finished, he did not, Cordelia would always remember this, he did not at once speak. He picked up the brass divider from the bench. He turned it once in his hand. He set it back down on the Gazette editor's morning call. He stood. He went to the window. He looked out at the lilac walk. The buds were beginning, in the new sun, to swell visibly. He asked her how much she owed in Birmingham. She told him, £1,298 as of last quarter. He said he would settle it by the noon post on Monday. She began to protest his name. He cut her off very quietly. I will settle it. I am not negotiating. I am stating an intention. I shall require you to permit it, but not to thank me, as the act of a man who has, since Wednesday, been reading your father's penciled marginalia on the Antigone. I have a name. I have a Cumberland estate. I have a great aunt at Bath I cannot bear. I have a settlement clause that will, in August, forfeit a fortune. I am offering all of it to you.
I am also offering the Birmingham banker. She said his name once more and told him there was a second piece of news about his father. He set the brass divider back on the bench and held her eye. I know about my father. I've always known. Mrs. Fenwick told me on the second morning. Marisol has not informed me of anything I did not already know about my father. She has informed you, because she has known for some months that I will not, at any forfeiture, marry her. She wanted you out of this house by Sunday, before I had time to make the matter unrecoverable. She has lost. She has known she has lost since Tuesday night, at the bay window, when I asked you for the half of your name. He said he had not been to the colonnade since November. He would go this evening. He would go with her. He would like, very much, for her to walk with him to the foot of the second column on the left. She did not, at first, speak. She picked up the brass divider. She set it in his hand. She closed his fingers around it. She said she would walk with him at 7, but that she had not, at 4, said yes, that she was working up to it. He answered that she had until next Tuesday. Mrs. Fenwick had told him to be patient for an hour, and he would be patient for 4 days. Then you are, Julian, 23 hours under the order. I am, Cordelia. I am at 4 ahead of schedule. She laughed. It was the first laugh of the afternoon. It was not a large one. It was not the laugh she had given the Dowager Lady Staunton on Tuesday night. It was a smaller, more private laugh, with the breath behind it of a woman who had spent 2 days holding a brass key under her bodice and was, at last, permitting the brass to warm to her own skin. He set the brass divider on the writing desk. He turned to her. He did not, at 4, kiss her. He stood, close, with his hand half raised toward her face, and he stopped, and he set the hand instead on the back of the writing chair. At 7, Cordelia, the colonnade. You will wear your own gown. She reminded him, dryly, that the only gown she owned was the grey work gown of an upper housemaid. He told her to wear it. The one thing he would demand, this week, was that she leave the apron upstairs. She agreed, very quietly, and he bowed and went. The library door shut quietly behind him. Cordelia sat in the bay window with the brass divider in her lap and the Gazette editor's morning call and Lady Marisol's note pinned to it on the bench beside her. And she did not, this afternoon, weep. She had, she catalogued, she had this afternoon been believed. They walked the colonnade at 7. The sun was 3 fingers above the lilac walk when they went out by the south door. Julian had changed his coat. Cordelia had taken off her apron and cap. The ink stain on her thumb was, in the 7 o'clock sun, almost gone. He did not, at first, take her arm. He walked at her left, 3 inches off her shoulder. He had the brass divider in his coat pocket. She felt the small weight of it when his coat brushed her sleeve. "The second column on the left," he said, and then, in a lower voice, that his father had been a difficult man, and not a cruel one, not, until that morning, a fragile one. He had been a magistrate for 30 years. He had buried Julian's mother in 1819. He had carried a great quantity of other people's lives without, to Julian's knowledge, ever setting one of them down. "He set this one down," Cordelia said. The gravel was warm under her shoes. Julian repeated it, as if she had given him a sentence he had been working at by himself for 6 months. She told him then about her own father's last fortnight, the Antigone Marginalia, the line on the laws older than any king, the man in Birmingham he had trusted because the man went to chapel. Her father had been taken before he could tell her sisters. She had told them herself in the kitchen at Ledbury on the 2nd day of Christmas of 1822. She had been, since 19, the person who told the children the news in her family. He stopped walking. They were at the second column. It was Bath stone, 4 feet across at the base, fluted, with a small chip at the south side where the off-horse had, she did not know at this moment, whether the chip was from the morning of or from 1,000 other mornings, and she did not ask. Julian set his hand on the column. He set his palm flat against the stone. "Father." He said it very quietly. He said it as if his father were behind the column, listening, and the listening required no volume. "I am, this evening, bringing Cordelia Hartwell to the second column on the left. I am, sir. I am asking her to be my wife. I am asking her, sir, to come into the house you could not, on the morning of, bear to be inside any longer. I am asking her, sir, to keep me in it." He took his palm off the stone. He turned to Cordelia. "That is what I came out here to say." She did not at once speak. She set her own palm flat against the stone where his had been. The bath stone was sun-warm, almost the temperature of his hand. She did not say anything to the old Duke. She said the thing she would have said to her own father. "Sir, I will keep him in the house. I will keep him in the colonnade. I will keep him, sir, in the breakfast room you walked out of. I will keep him at the second column on the left. I will, sir. I will be a difficult woman about it. I am sorry. He has, sir. He has chosen a difficult one." She took her palm off the stone. Julian, who had been watching her hand, looked up. The grey eyes, thunder-clouded, were not in the 7 o'clock light, the colour of a thundercloud. They were the colour of pewter that had been set down by a kitchen fire for so long that the kitchen had warmed it. "Cordelia." "Julian." "Walk back with me by the lilac walk." "Yes." They walked back. Halfway up the lilac walk, where the path narrows between two old hawthorn standards, he stopped. He did not, this time, set his palm on the stone. He set his palm on her cheek. He let his thumb travel the line of her jaw. She did not, at first, breathe. And then she did, at the unusual rate, and he set his forehead lightly against hers. "Yes or no, Cordelia?" "Yes, Julian." He did not kiss her there. He set his mouth against her temple, once, briefly, hot. And then he stepped back, and he tucked her arm through his elbow, and he walked her up the lilac walk to the south door, and the lilacs along the wall had, that warm afternoon, opened the first of their buds, and the smell of them, faint, sweet, just beginning, came round Cordelia's shoulders, like a shawl she had not, at 26, owned before. They had 4 days. They had Saturday, which was the day the Gazette's morning call became, by noon, the property of every parsonage between Newbury and Reading. Julian and Cordelia spent it in the steward's room with Hargrave, going through the household ledgers and the dairymaid's wages and the Birmingham banker's draft. Mrs. Fenwick wrote the letter to Vivian in Cheltenham. She was better at sisters than Cordelia was. They had Sunday, which they spent in the village at the morning service, Cordelia in a borrowed bonnet of Mrs. Fenwick's, because she had not yet permitted Julian to send for a milliner, and Julian very upright in the family pew. The parson preached, with notable lack of subtlety, on the parable of the talents. The village did not, all told, sit down at its Sunday luncheon disappointed. They had Monday. Julian sent the noon post to Birmingham. Cordelia wrote her sisters in Cheltenham. The lilacs along the south wall opened a second tier. Mrs. Fenwick, for the first time in 14 months, laid Cordelia's place at the breakfast table beside Julian's. Cordelia ate 2 pieces of toast in her grey work gown. She would not yet wear anything else. Vivian had sent a parcel of day gowns by the morning coach. It had not arrived. Julian watched her eat. The chaffinch in the lilac sang its 3 syllables, and Cordelia thought, "This is what I am for." And then they had Tuesday. Tuesday morning, 11 o'clock. The lilacs, by this hour, were 3/4 open, and the south side of the house smelled of them as far in as the front hall. Cordelia was in the library. She had put off the apron, finally. Mrs. Fenwick had brought her one of Vivian's 3-day gowns from the parcel that had arrived Monday evening, a sprigged muslin in pale primrose, plain in cut, with a small frilled cuff that suited her wrist better than the sapphire had. And Cordelia, regarding herself in the long pier glass on the landing, had said, "Mrs. Fenwick, I look like a curate's daughter on the day of her cousin's wedding." "You are, Cora, Miss Cordelia, you are a curate's daughter, and the day is your own." "Mrs. Fenwick." "Yes." "I am terrified." "Yes." "Of what, Mrs. Fenwick? Of what?" "Of being seen, child. Of being seen in your own gown. You have been in another woman's gown for so long that you have forgotten the weight of your own." It is lighter." "Yes, that is the trouble. Down you go. He is in the library." She had gone down. She had sat with Julian in the bay window for an hour. They had not, that hour, talked much. They had read Antigone aloud from her father's marked pages, and Julian had been, she catalogued, surprised at his own Greek, which had been schooled at Eton and slept since 1819, and Cordelia had corrected him 3 times, very gently, and the 3rd time he had laughed. It was at the 3rd laugh that the library door opened, and Pratt came in. And Pratt's face was the face of a man whose carefully arranged mourning had, between the door and the carpet, collapsed. "Your Grace." "Pratt?" "Lady Vane, beg pardon, Your Grace. Lady Vane is in the morning room. With, Your Grace, with Lady Staunton, and with Lady Briar, and with the Dowager Lady Carmichael, and with, Your Grace, with 3 other ladies the housekeeper has not been able to deny entry to without making, at the door, a scene. They have all driven up together. They have asked to be received." Julian's hand stilled on the page. He did not at once swear. He set the book down. He stood.
Cordelia.
"Julian, this is the conversation I had hoped you would not have to be in the room for." "Then I shall be in the room for it." "Cordelia." "Julian, I shall be in the room for it. I am, Julian. I am wearing my own gown. I am, this morning, terrified. I shall not, this morning, be made smaller by being elsewhere." He looked at her. Then he looked at Pratt. "Show them into the morning room. Tell the housekeeper to bring tea, proper tea, full table, the second best china. And tell her, Pratt, tell her to be very visible. Your Grace?" "Cordelia, are you ready?" "No." "Walk with me." "Yes." They walked. The morning room, green and cream, the chaffinch outside, held 7 women in 7 hats. Lady Marisol stood at the fire in dark green merino. Lady Staunton, in plum-coloured silk and carnelian beads, sat closest to the chaffinch. The Marchioness of Briar sat with her hands very still on her lap, her gown the silver grey of a magistrate's wife. The other 4 were faces Cordelia did not know. Mrs. Fenwick was at the door behind the tea-tray, perfectly upright, with the small silver crucifix at her throat. Julian crossed to Lady Marisol first. He did not, Cordelia noticed, bow. "Marisol." "Julian." "This is unkind of you." "This is, Julian, kind. To the wives of 7 of your tenants who have, this morning, between Lady Staunton's drawing-room and yours, been told that the future Duchess of Ashborne has been in domestic service in your London house for 14 months. They have come to confirm the report. I have brought them." "You have, Marisol, brought them at the wrong hour." "I have brought them, Julian, at the only hour you would not have time to send them away. It is now 11:30. You will be required to give them a half-hour at least. I have, Julian, done you the courtesy of letting you give it in your own morning room." "Cordelia."
Cordelia stepped forward. The 7 hats turned. The 7 faces, Lady Staunton's curiosity, the Marchioness's stillness, Lady Marisol's beautiful coolness, 4 faces unknown to her, went over her. Cordelia did not, for once, catalogue. She curtsied. It was the curtsy of an upper housemaid in a great house on a Christmas morning when the family come down. Neat, unfussy, the practiced curtsy of 14 months. Then she straightened. My ladies, I am Cordelia Hartwell. My father was the Reverend Edmund Hartwell of Ledbury, taken by a fever in 1822. He left 4 daughters and a debt of £1,400 to a Birmingham banker. For 14 months I have been upper housemaid in the Duke's London house, under the name Cora Wright, my mother's maiden name. I have paid down £118 out of my wages. On Tuesday, I attended the charity ball in my cousin's sapphire silk, under my own Christian name. I stepped on the Duke's boot. He did not, that night, know I was his housemaid. I did not, that night, know he was a duke. We have, since Wednesday, been making the introductions. I am, my ladies, in my own gown. She did not, at the end, say anything else. She did not look at Julian. She looked at the Marchioness of Briar, the silver-grey gown, the still hands, because the Marchioness was the woman in the room whose drawing-room would, by Wednesday, set the matter for Berkshire. The Marchioness rose. Miss Hartwell. Madam, I am. Let me be quite plain. I am not, this morning, troubled. Madam, I am a great deal more troubled by the fact that a young woman of your station has been paying down a Birmingham canal debt out of housemaid's wages for 14 months than by the fact that she has, after the 14 months, accepted a proposal in her own gown in her employer's morning room. I shall be calling on you on Thursday with my niece Helena, who reads Greek, and who shall read with you in the bay window for an hour. Lady Staunton. Madam, you will come with me. Madam, I had thought, perhaps, I might... Lady Staunton. Madam, you will come with me. Madam. Lady Staunton rose. The Marchioness curtsied to Cordelia. The Marchioness curtsied to Julian. The Marchioness curtsied, with the smallest possible movement, to Lady Marisol. The Marchioness walked out. Of the other 4 hats, 3 rose. They curtsied to Cordelia. They left. The 4th, Lady Carmichael, was the dowager of the man Lady Marisol was, on Wednesday, to marry. The dowager rose last. She looked at Lady Marisol for a moment that contained a great deal of arithmetic. Marisol. Madam. My son will, on Wednesday, marry a woman who has, on Tuesday, used him as her weapon in another woman's morning room. I do not, Marisol. I do not, this morning, know what I shall tell him. Madam, you will, by tomorrow morning, sign the Cumberland renunciation. By noon, return the engagement ring my son sent you in March. By evening, be in your aunt's house in Hampshire. The Earl of Carmichael will not marry you on Wednesday, Marisol. He will not marry you in November. He will not, by the time I have done with him, marry you. You may consult your own father, who is, I am told, on his 90th birthday in a chair in Bath, on what is now to become of you. Madam, I have Marisol. I am... Child, I am much older than you. I am very tired. I have come to this morning room only because Lady Staunton said you required it. I do not, Marisol, require it. Go home. Lady Marisol stood for a long moment at the fire. She did not. Cordelia would think of this later. She did not break. She did not weep. She did not raise her voice. She curtsied to Cordelia. Miss Hartwell, my lady, you have, this morning, won.
My lady, I have not this morning played.
Lady Marisol bowed. She walked across the morning room. She passed Julian without looking at him. She passed Mrs. Fenwick at the door without looking at her. She got into Lady Carmichael's carriage at the gravel sweep, and she did not, on the long road to Briar Court, weep, because she had not been raised to. Mrs. Fenwick, at the door, set the tea tray down on the side table beside the small Sèvres bowl.
Your Grace. Mrs. Fenwick. Tea. Tea.
Cordelia sat down on the green and cream chair, in her own gown, with her hands folded on her lap. The Dowager Lady Carmichael, 68 years old, very upright, in lavender silk, sat down on the chair opposite. She looked at Cordelia. She did not, at first, speak.
Miss Hartwell.
Madam.
You will, on Thursday at 11, sit with me and my niece in the bay window and read Greek. On Friday afternoon, drive with me to Newbury and let me introduce you to my goddaughter, who needs a sister in the house. On Saturday morning, come with Julian to my Sunday breakfast at 12. Send Mrs. Fenwick a list of what you require, and we shall have it brought into your dressing room by Monday week. Is that acceptable to you?
Madam.
Yes.
I am very grateful, madam.
You are not, child, to be grateful. You are to be useful. The Cumberland tenants will, by Thursday, hear that the new Duchess is a vicar's daughter who has paid down £1,000 out of housemaid's wages. They will be a great deal more interested in her than in the most Frenchified ward of an executor in 1825. You will be doing me and the Cumberland tenants a service. Do you understand?
Yes, madam.
Drink your tea, child. It is going cold. Cordelia drank her tea. The chaffinch outside the window repeated its 3 syllables. Mrs. Fenwick refilled the dowager's cup. Julian, for the first time that morning, sat down on the arm of Cordelia's chair, very briefly, with one hand on her shoulder, and then stood again at the fire because he had been raised, since 9, not to sit beside his women in front of Dowager Lady Carmichael's. The Dowager, who had been raised since 14 to notice these things, pretended she had not seen it. They had 3 more days. Wednesday. Julian went up to London by the morning coach to settle the Birmingham banker in person. He would not leave the closing of her father's debt to the Morning Post. He took the brass divider in his coat pocket. He took Cordelia's letter to the Birmingham banker, 3 sentences in her own hand, sealed with the rosemary seal, in the inside pocket against his shirt.
He kissed her on the gravel sweep at 6.
A real kiss, the first. He had been keeping count. And he said, 3 days.
3 days, Julian.
I shall be back on Friday at 4.
I shall be in the bay window.
You shall be in the bay window.
Julian.
Yes?
Read Antigone on the coach.
I shall. He went. The coach turned out of the lodge gate. Cordelia stood on the gravel a moment in the morning damp, watched the dust settle, then went up the front stair. She would not, after Tuesday, go up the back stair unless she chose to. Let herself into the library, sat down in the bay window with her father's penciled Antigone, opened it to the page of her father's last mark and, for the first time in 4 years, turned the page. The Antigone went on past her father's mark. The chorus on the unwritten laws was followed by the messenger, and the messenger was followed by Eurydice, and the writing of the rest of the play had been waiting on the next page for 4 years for the daughter of the Reverend Edmund Hartwell to be ready to read it. She read for an hour. She was, at 9:30 on Wednesday morning, in the bay window in her primrose muslin, with the brass divider laid on the bench beside her where Julian had left it for her to keep. At last, in her own life. She would have said, afterwards, that she did not know what made her go down to the colonnade at 3. She had walked past the south door 3 times that morning without choosing to. At 3 she went out without a shawl, the lilacs full open by then, and the air smelling of them up the south wall, and she walked to the second column on the left, set her palm on the bath stone,
where Julian's palm had been on Friday, and said, to the old Duke, the way she had said to her own father, "Sir, I am keeping him." It was, she thought, a small private vow. It was, she did not know yet, also the wrong one. Pratt rode in at 4:30 with the dispatch from London. He came at a gallop up the lilac walk. His horse was lathered. He swung off in the gravel sweep without throwing the rein. He came up the front steps, 2 at a time. Mrs. Fenwick met him in the front hall, and her face, for the first time in 14 months that Cordelia had seen, went the colour of paper.
Pratt.
Mrs. Fenwick, His Grace,
Pratt.
His Grace, on the London road this morning, 6 miles south of Reading, the off-horse of the mail coach. Mrs. Fenwick, a stone, Mrs. Fenwick, a stone in the road, the wheel cast. The coach went over on the south side. And His Grace,
Pratt.
His Grace is at the King's Head at Reading, Mrs. Fenwick. He has taken a hard knock on the side of the head from the roof rail. He is, Mrs. Fenwick, he is not, the surgeon says, in any immediate danger. He is, Mrs. Fenwick, he is not yet sensible. He has been not sensible for 5 hours. Cordelia, who had come down the front stair with the Antigone in her hand at the sound of the gallop, set the book down on the marquetry table beside the Sèvres bowl very, very carefully.
Mrs. Fenwick.
Cora, Miss Cordelia, Mrs. Fenwick. I'm going to Reading. Child, I'm going to Reading. Send for the chaise. Send for Pratt's second horse for the boy. Pratt, eat. You have not eaten. Mrs. Fenwick will give you bread in the kitchen. Mrs. Fenwick, I shall be in the front hall in the cloak in 7 minutes. Send the boot boy to the stables. Send word to the home farm. I shall be at the King's Head by midnight. Send the surgeon at Reading word that I am coming. Cora, Mrs. Fenwick, I am the Duke of Ashbourne's wife in everything but the writing of the banns. I am, Mrs. Fenwick, going to Reading. Yes, child. She went. She rode the 32 miles to Reading in the dark, in the chaise, in her primrose muslin under the borrowed black wool cloak, with the brass divider in the pocket because she had put it there at 5 without remembering. She did not, on the long Berkshire lanes, weep. She had been a vicar's daughter and a housemaid, and had, at 26, done a great deal of her crying already. She thought, on the way, of the chip in the second column on the left. She did not yet, that night, know what Pratt did not know. She did not yet know that the surgeon at Reading was a man named Mr. Cushing, who had been at Brasenose with Julian's late father, who had attended on the drive in 1825 also, who had signed the verdict of misadventure as a kindness, and who had, when Pratt had ridden ahead to fetch him, given Pratt, in addition to the surgical bulletin, a small private opinion he had not put in the bulletin. Mr. Cushing had told Pratt that the wound at the side of His Grace's head was not consistent with the roof rail of a mail coach. It was consistent with a deliberate blow at close range from a person who had climbed into the coach with him. There had been another passenger, a man in a dark blue coat, who had gone down at the same upset, walked to the public house at Aldermaston, and paid from a purse the watchman had noted because it bore the small embossed cipher of the House of Vane. Mr. Cushing had told Pratt this at 4 o'clock. Pratt had, in the gallop home, decided not to tell Cordelia. Pratt had decided to tell Mrs. Fenwick. Mrs. Fenwick had, at 5, gone up to her room and closed the door for 2 minutes. She had told Tom, the boot boy, to ride behind the chaise on the second horse, to keep within sight, and to ride hard for help if anything on the road did not look correct. She had told Pratt to write out a full account of what Mr. Cushing had said, sealed by 6. And at 5:30, she sent the account to the magistrate at Newbury, witnessed by Hargrave. By 6:30 on Wednesday evening, the magistrate at Newbury had a sworn statement on his table.
By 8 o'clock, The magistrate had ridden in person to Briar Court with 2 men of the parish. Lady Marisol Vane, packing in dark green merino in the upstairs gallery, had been called down to her own drawing room. The magistrate had, without sitting, read her the statement. Lady Marisol had not, at the reading, broken. She had, Mrs. Fenwick would learn later, set her hand on the back of the drawing-room chair and said, "My second cousin, Mr. James Vane, has been in my employ for 3 years. I have not seen him since Monday afternoon at 4 o'clock. You may search my house. You may search my stables. I am not able to tell you, this evening, that I had no part in his journey. I had asked him, on Monday at 4, to ensure that the Duke of Ashborne did not, on Wednesday, reach Birmingham. I did not, magistrate, specify the means." The magistrate had taken her into custody at 8:20 on Wednesday evening. He had sent a second rider, Hard, for Reading, with word to the King's Head and to the surgeon and to Mrs. Fenwick. Cordelia, in the chaise on the Reading Road at midnight, did not, she would think of this often, did not yet know any of this. She knew only that the wheels were turning and that the air smelled of late spring rain, and that her hand in the pocket of the cloak had closed around the brass divider so hard that the ebony handle had marked her palm. The King's Head at Reading had a private parlour on the first floor. Mr. Cushing, the surgeon, met her on the landing at 1:20 in the morning, in his shirt sleeves, with his coat over his arm. "Miss Hartwell." "Sir." "He is, Miss Hartwell. He is awake. He has been awake 40 minutes. He has been asking, twice, for the brass divider." "It is in my pocket." "Then take it into him. Sit beside him. Do not raise your voice. The skull is bruised, not cracked. It will mend. He was struck by a person, Miss Hartwell, not by a roof rail. I have told Pratt. I have told the magistrate at Reading. I have told the magistrate at Newbury, who will have taken the person concerned into custody by 10 this evening. You are, by my reckoning of the morning room at Ashbourne Park yesterday, his wife." "Sir, I am not yet his wife." "You are. Go in." She went in. He lay in the bed in his shirt with the curtain drawn back and a single candle on the small inn table at his elbow, and his head was bandaged in clean linen, and the linen was, she catalogued, clean. The grey eyes opened at the latch.
"Cordelia."
"Julian." You have been hit on the head, Julian, with, Mr. Cushing tells me, with a thing that was not a coach. I have brought you the brass divider. I'm going to sit beside you. Julian, I'm not going anywhere. Cordelia, the Birmingham banker has been settled. Pratt had the draft in your coat pocket. Mr. Cushing took the coat off you. Pratt took the draft out of the inside pocket and gave it to the landlord, who paid the coach up. I do not yet know all of this, Julian. You do not need to know all of this. You need to know that the Birmingham debt is, Julian, paid by you this afternoon, as you intended, by the noon post. Cordelia. Yes. My head hurts, I know. Drink this. Mr. Cushing gave me the cup at the door. He drank. She sat on the edge of the bed in her primrose muslin. The borrowed black wool cloak was on the chair. She set the brass divider on the coverlet under his hand. He closed his fingers around it.
"Cordelia."
Yes. I have been 3 days. I have been thinking, on the coach to London, in the inn at Reading at 10 this morning, in the brandy at the King's Head at noon. And I have been thinking, since 5 o'clock, when I came back to my senses. I have been thinking. Cordelia, I have been thinking what I should have said in the morning room on Wednesday last. Julian, you are bandaged. I have been thinking, Cordelia, that on Wednesday last I asked you to marry me before I had earned the asking. I had not, that morning, paid the Birmingham banker. I had not sat down with you in the bay window with my father's brass divider. I had not walked the colonnade to the second column on the left. I had asked you on Wednesday, because I had not had time on Tuesday night to ask you in the corridor. I am, this morning, Wednesday by the inn clock. Cordelia.
Asking you again.
Julian, you are concussed.
I am, Cordelia. I am clear.
You are bandaged.
That is not, Cordelia. That is not the same. She laughed. It was the second laugh of the week.
She held the brass divider on the coverlet under his hand, and she set her own hand over his, and she said,
Julian.
I have, in the chaise from Ashbourne Park to Reading, on the 32 miles, with my hand on this brass. I have done very nearly all of my marrying you between mile 14 and mile 23. Since mile 23, I have been making the lists of what I shall require Mrs. Fenwick to bring in by Monday week. I have been doing the work of a duchess for the better part of 2 hours in the chaise. I am, Julian, settled.
Cordelia.
Yes.
Marry me at the Lilac Walk on Monday.
Yes, Julian.
Cordelia.
Yes.
You will be, Cordelia, you will be in your own gown.
I shall be in my own gown.
That is, Cordelia, that is the only thing in this room I am, this morning, permitted to demand.
You may, Julian, you may demand a great many things.
I shall not, on the morning I have been concussed, demand them. She laughed for the third time.
She did not, that morning, weep. She sat on the edge of the bed, with her hand on his, and the brass divider warm under both their hands, and she, for the first time in 4 years, did not catalogue. She had, she would think later, at last got past her own marginal mark. Mr. Cushing kept Julian 3 days at the King's Head. Pratt rode back to Ashbourne Park on Thursday morning with a full bulletin and a private note from Cordelia to Mrs. Fenwick. Mrs. Fenwick, he is mending. He has asked me, this morning, to marry him at the Lilac Walk on Monday. I have said yes. I shall require the simplest white muslin, and in the bouquet 3 sprigs of lilac and 1 sprig of rosemary. Mrs. Bessie on the lilac walk in her own gown, with her wrist mended. Tom in his Sunday jacket. I shall require you to give me away. Julian has agreed.
Cordelia.
Mrs. Fenwick read the note in her own room at the back of the housekeeping passage at 11 on Thursday morning. She then, without notice, sat down on her deal chair and put her hand over her mouth, and she, for the first time since 1819, cried for 2 minutes. Then she rose, washed her face, and went down to the linen press to count out the muslin. They came home on Sunday afternoon. Julian came down out of the chaise at the gravel sweep with the bruise still at his temple, and Cordelia came down behind him in her primrose muslin. Mrs. Fenwick was at the front step. Behind her, Hargrave and 6 maids in Sunday aprons, Tom the boot boy in his Sunday jacket, Bessie the dairymaid with cowslips at her bodice. Pratt was at the gate, and beyond him a small column of tenants from the home farm stood in their Sunday coats, hats in their hands. They had not been told to come. They had come. Julian stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked at his own front door for a moment without going up. Then he looked at Cordelia.
Cordelia.
Julian.
This is the part of being a duke I have not in 6 months been able to do.
I know.
Cordelia, do I bow?
No, Julian. You go up the steps. You go past Mrs. Fenwick. You say to her, thank you. To Hargrave, thank you. To Tom, well done. You go in. You sit in the morning room. I shall be in directly. Mrs. Fenwick will bring you tea. Mrs. Bessie will curtsy. Pratt will stand at the door. The tenants will have gone home to their suppers because they have what they came for.
What did they come for, Cordelia? They came to see you come home, Julian. In your own front door. With your own... me. With your own... Cordelia. With me. He went up the steps. He thanked Mrs. Fenwick. He thanked Hargrave. He thanked Tom. He went in. Cordelia stood for a moment on the bottom step and looked across the gravel to the lodge gate. And Pratt, at the gate, touched his hat to her, and the tenants, beyond Pratt, touched their hats also, in a small, rough, unschooled wave. And she touched her own hat back, and she went in. Mrs. Fenwick, at the door, said only, "Cora, welcome home." "Mrs. Fenwick, thank you." The lilac walk on Monday morning was full open. The lilacs were the colour of old amethyst, and the bees were in them, and the parson from the village stood at the foot of the second column on the left, in his Sunday surplice, with the parish register under his arm. Cordelia walked the lilac walk on Mrs. Fenwick's arm, in plain white muslin with a small frill at the cuff, with 3 sprigs of lilac and 1 sprig of rosemary in her hand. Her hair was loose under a circlet of fresh lilac that Mrs. Bessie, the dairymaid, had wound for her in the still room at 6 in the morning. Her father's brass key was at her throat on the black velvet ribbon. The bone seal was beside it. Both were, in the May sun, warm before she reached the parson. Julian was at the second column. He wore his father's dark blue coat. The bruise at his temple was, in the sun, the faint colour of the lilac buds had been on the day she had come home from Briar Court. He held his father's brass divider in his hand. The Marchioness of Briar stood at the parson's right with her niece Helena, who at 9:30 was openly reading a small green Greek lexicon in case the service paused. The Dowager Lady Carmichael stood at the parson's left in lavender silk. Mrs. Fenwick gave Cordelia's hand into Julian's at the foot of the column and stepped back, and did not, on her own life, weep. Hargrave stood 3 paces back with the tenants and the staff, and Mrs. Bessie and Tom the boot boy. The parson read the service. He read it short. He had, the day before, been told to. When the parson reached the place at which Cordelia was required to give her name, Cordelia said, clearly, in her own voice, "Cordelia Ann Hartwell." When the parson reached the place at which Julian was required to give his, Julian said, "Julian Edmund Ashborne." When the parson came to the place at which a ring was required, Julian set the brass divider in Cordelia's left hand instead. The ring, a small, chased gold band that had been his mother's, went on her finger over the brass. The brass came off again at the parson's nod. Julian closed her hand around it. The parson, who had been instructed about this in writing the day before, did not, in his sermon, mention it. The parson pronounced them. Julian set his palm on the column at the second column on the left for a moment. Cordelia set her palm in the column under his. Then he turned to her. "Cordelia. Julian." He kissed her on the lilac walk at the second column on the left in front of 7 tenants, 6 maids, 1 boot boy, 1 dairymaid, 1 marchioness, 1 Dowager Lady Carmichael, 1 steward, 1 housekeeper, 1 parson, and a chaffinch in the lilac, repeating its 3 syllables exactly as it had repeated them in the morning room on Wednesday last. And she, for the first time in 4 years, laughed during a kiss. 6 months later, in the first hard frost of November, Cordelia stood at the south door of Ashbourne Park in her own crimson pelisse, chosen and paid for by herself out of the small private allowance Julian had settled on her after the wedding. And she watched her husband cross the lilac walk with the brass divider in his coat pocket and Helena's small grey kitten under his arm, because Helena had brought the kitten from Briar that morning, and it had escaped twice. Mrs. Fenwick stood at her elbow. "Mrs. Fenwick, Your Grace, I have this morning finished Antigone." "For the second time, Your Grace, or for the first?" "For the first, Mrs. Fenwick. The first time I read it, my father stopped me at the chorus on the unwritten laws. This morning I have read past the messenger and past Eurydice, and past the last line. And, Mrs. Fenwick, the last line is the best one.
It usually is, Your Grace.
Mrs. Fenwick.
Yes.
Send for Tom. I should like him to take a basket of the early forced violets to the lodge for Mr. Pringle's wife. She is unwell. I should like the basket lined with the muslin from my wedding. I have, Mrs. Fenwick, no further use for the muslin.
Your Grace.
And, Mrs. Fenwick, send word to the parson that I shall sit with Helena in the bay window at 11 for our Greek hour. The Marchioness will be in by 12.
Your Grace.
Mrs. Fenwick went. Julian came up the steps with the kitten under his arm.
Cordelia, the kitten is going to require a name.
That is, Julian, that is its third name. We have already called it Hermia and Iphigenia. It has refused both. What does it answer to? It answers, Julian, to the brass divider when you set the brass divider on the carpet. It is, Julian, your kitten. It is, Cordelia, Helena's kitten. Then it shall be Helena's. Helena is, at 11, coming up to read Greek with me. The kitten may sit on the bench between us. He laughed. He set the kitten down on the warm bath stone of the front step. The kitten, small, grey, very fluffy at the throat, sat down. It looked with great calm at the lilac walk. The lilacs had been bare for 4 months. The buds, Cordelia noticed, were already, in November, the colour of old pewter, swelling against the dry brown stems. Julian took the brass divider out of his coat pocket. He laid it on the warm bath stone of the front step between them. He did not, this morning, say anything about it. Cordelia set her hand over the brass.
Julian?
Yes?
Sic recolo.
Thus I remember. Thus I remember. The chaffinch, the same chaffinch by Mrs. Fenwick's reckoning, repeated its 3 syllables in the bare lilac. Cordelia rested her palm on the gatepost in the November sun, and the brass under her hand was warm, and she did not, this morning, polish anything. If you have stayed to the end of this story, thank you. Tell me in the comments which line of the kitchen and the bay window made you smile, and if you would like more like this from Adrian's Fireside, the subscribe button is, as ever, kept very near the fire.